Even though I walk through the dark valley, I fear no evil, for you are at my side with your rod and your staff that give me courage. St. John of the Cross was born in Avila, Spain in 1542. He was given a religious education from a young age and chose to follow a religious path even as a child. In 1563, at the age of 21, he was able to join the Carmelite order and took the name John of St. Matthias. He became a priest in 1567 and considered joining the Carthusian order, where monks lived a cloistered life in individual cells. He was attracted by the simple and quiet life. However, he encountered Teresa of Avila, a charismatic Carmelite nun who asked John to follow her. He was attracted by the strict routine followed by her, as well as her devotion to prayer and simplicity. Her followers went barefoot and therefore were known as the Descalced Carmelites. In 1568, Teresa founded a new monastery. On the same day of its founding, John changed his name to John of the Cross. In 1572, he traveled to Avila at the invitation of Teresa to become her confessor and spiritual guide. While there, he had a vision of Christ and made a drawing that remains to this day called Christ from Above. The little drawing shows Christ on the cross, looking down on him from above, an image that is preserved for centuries. Around 1575, a rift within the Carmelite order began to grow and create controversy between various monastic houses. There was a disagreement between the Descalced Carmelites and the ordinary Carmelites over reform. The Descalced Carmelites sought to restore the original strict routine and regimen that the order had at its founding. Teresa, along with John, were the ones seeking to implement this to restore the original rule. On December 2nd, 1577, a group of Carmelites broke into John's residence and kidnapped him. He was brought before a court, placed on trial for disobedience, and punished by imprisonment. A cell was made for him in the monastery that was so small he could barely lie on the floor. He was fed only bread and water and occasional scraps of salt fish. Each week he was taken into public and lashed, then returned to his cell. His only luxuries were a prayer book and an oil lamp to read it by. To pass the time, he wrote poems on paper that was smuggled to him by the friar charged with guarding his cell. He became known as a remarkable and influential poet. After 9 months of imprisonment, John finally managed to pry his cell door from its hinges and escape. He joined Teresa's nuns in Toledo and spent 6 weeks in the hospital to recover. In 1591, he became ill with a skin condition that resulted in an infection, and he died on December 14th, 1591. Shortly following his burial, there was a dispute over where he should be buried, which was resolved by removing his legs and arms. Over the years, parts of his body were placed on display or buried over several places. You've probably heard the term dark night of the soul. It describes the darkness which a person goes through in deeply searching for the presence of the living God and discovering him when all human senses have been suspended. That phrase is taken from one of his most famous books, called by that same title, Dark Night of the Soul. It is a spiritual masterpiece and a companion of many mystics and contemplatives. St. John of the Cross was canonized by Pope Benedict XIII in 1726. I'd like to read an excerpt from one of John's canticles that shows how deeply he was committed. We must then dig deeply in Christ. He is like a rich mine with many pockets containing treasures. However deep we dig, we will never find their end or their limit. Indeed, in every pocket, new seams of fresh riches are discovered on all sides. For this reason, the Apostle Paul said of Christ, "In him are hidden all the treasures of the wisdom and knowledge of God." The soul cannot enter into these treasures nor attain them unless it first crosses into and enters the thicket of suffering, enduring interior and exterior labors, and unless it first receives from God very many blessings in the intellect and in the senses, and has undergone long spiritual training. All these are lesser things, disposing the soul for the lofty sanctuary of the mysteries of Christ. This is the highest wisdom attainable in this life. Would that people might come at last to see that it is quite impossible to reach the thicket of the riches and wisdom of God, except by first entering the thicket of much suffering, in such a way that the soul finds there its consolation and desire. The soul that longs for divine wisdom chooses first, and in truth, to enter the thicket of the cross. The deeply spiritual life is no easy path, and we ought to know the cost before we undertake it, lest, beginning it, we lose heart and despair, never coming to know the true riches of life in Christ, and opening ourselves up to the wiles of the evil